Did you put snaps in? Yeah. Hit it hard.
No one expected the league to erupt the way it did. One moment, fans were arguing about a controversial foul call, and the next, the entire basketball world was shaken by a piece of news that spread faster than game highlights. Two respected players, Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull, were suddenly walking away from the Indiana Fever at the exact moment that Caitlin Clark was dealing with her suspension. For many, this was more than a headline. It was a symbol of chaos, frustration, and a locker room silently boiling over. As analysts scrambled to decode the timing, fans were left asking the same questions. How did everything collapse so quickly? Why now? And what really happened behind the scenes? Because nothing about this exit felt routine. It felt emotional, messy, and loaded with meaning. Even people who do not follow the Fever closely could sense something deeper, something personal. Sophie Cunningham, known for her fire, competitiveness, and unapologetic energy, had always projected toughness. Lexie Hull, admired for her discipline and consistent effort, was the quiet stabilizer. Their departures happening right when Caitlin Clark, the most watched rookie in WNBA history, was forced to sit out, added a layer of tension that no one could ignore. The effect was immediate. Social media exploded. Debates grew louder, and suspicions about internal team issues spread through fan groups within minutes. What was being framed as a simple roster shift now looked like a domino effect triggered by something far bigger than an on-court suspension. This moment did not feel like the usual ups and downs of a long season. It felt like a breaking point, a dramatic, emotional turning point for the Fever, a team already under the most intense spotlight the franchise had faced in years. And as more detail surfaced, it became clear that this story was not about one suspension or two exits. It was about pressure, expectations, and a team struggling to stay united under the brightest spotlight in modern WNBA history. Caitlin Clark's suspension was more than a temporary setback. It was the spark that ignited a storm waiting to explode. The play leading up to it had already stirred controversy. Fans were divided between calling it reckless, unfair, or simply part of the game. The moment the league announced her suspension, the entire basketball community stopped and stared as if someone had pulled the fire alarm during a championship ceremony. Clark is not just another rookie. She is the face of a new era. The kind of player who sells out arenas, moves ratings upward, and brings millions of new eyes to a league that had been begging for this level of attention for years. So when the league suspended her, it sent a message that rang louder than anything that happened on the court. Inside the Fever locker room, emotions were running high. Some players believed the scrutiny around Clark was becoming overwhelming. Others felt the team was losing its identity because every mistake, every foul, and every decision now belonged to a national conversation that no one inside the locker room could escape. This suspension brought all of that tension into the open. It forced the team to confront uncomfortable questions. Was the pressure becoming unbearable? Was the chemistry beginning to fracture? Was the team being pulled in too many directions at once? As the media frenzy grew, players who had spent their entire careers working quietly were suddenly under the same microscope as Clark. The spotlight did not just cover her, it swallowed the entire franchise. And for Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull, who had always valued stability, respect, and clarity, this atmosphere felt less like a competitive environment and more like a pressure cooker ready to burst. The suspension was not just about Clark sitting out. It was the moment the Fever could no longer pretend everything was fine. It was the moment when the cracks in the foundation became visible to everyone watching. Sophie Cunningham has always been known for her intensity, her hunger to compete, her willingness to fight for every loose ball, and her refusal to back down from anyone made her a fan favorite long before she ever stepped into an Indiana Fever jersey. Yet, that same fire often reveals deeper emotions hidden behind her game face. And according to insiders, those emotions had been simmering long before the suspension. Sources close to the team described Sophie as feeling increasingly sidelined, misunderstood, and undervalued. The spotlight around Clark had grown so bright that it cast long shadows over others, and Sophie felt it more than most. She was used to being a spark, an energy source, a player whose presence influenced the flow of the game. But now, that influence was getting buried under the weight of national expectations and nonstop media attention. Teammates sensed her frustration. Some said she tried to mask it with humor, while others felt her competitiveness shifting into something sharper, something heavier. Every game mattered, yet it felt like every narrative revolved around someone else. Like her contributions no longer mattered unless they directly fed into a headline. When Clark's suspension hit, Sophie's emotions, already heightened, turned into something she could no longer control internally. It was as if the suspension confirmed everything she felt building inside. Disconnected roles, shaky leadership, constant pressure, personal expectations clashing with team dynamics. For someone with her passion, the decision to walk away was not impulsive. It was emotional, layered, and the result of countless moments that piled up until she could not pretend anymore. Her exit was not about abandoning the team. It was about reclaiming her sense of self. And whether people agree or not, her departure became a powerful statement. A moment that revealed just how fragile things had become behind closed doors. Unlike Sophie, Lexie Hull is not the type to ignite the court with emotion. Her presence comes through discipline, calm focus, and a quiet kind of leadership. She rarely seeks attention. She rarely raises her voice. She simply plays the game with respect, precision, and heart. That is why her departure stunned fans even more. If someone as grounded as Lexie decided to walk away, something was deeply wrong. Those close to her say she felt overwhelmed by the nonstop drama surrounding the fever. Lexie had never wanted to play in a spotlight fueled by controversy, constant media pressure, and social media battles. She wanted to grow, improve, and contribute, not navigate a storm of narratives that often had nothing to do with basketball. The suspension of Clark did not just disrupt the team's playing rotation. It disrupted the emotional structure of the locker room. Every conversation suddenly felt tense. Every media session felt like a trap. Every silence felt like it carried weight. Lexie tried to adapt. She tried to stay focused on the fundamentals that had always defined her playing style. But no amount of professionalism could erase the feeling that the environment was becoming unhealthy. The joy she once felt stepping onto the court was getting buried under the stress of trying to stay composed in a chaotic atmosphere. Her departure was not loud, and it was not dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and filled with a kind of sadness. Because she did not want to leave. She simply felt she no longer had a choice. And that silence, that calm exit, spoke louder than any public statement ever could. It showed that the team was losing more than players. It was losing trust, stability, and the emotional balance needed to survive a season under this much pressure. Every sports franchise deals with pressure. But what the Fever were facing was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Caitlin Clark's arrival brought millions of eyes to a team that had long struggled for attention. Suddenly, every win, every loss, every substitution became a national talking point. This rapid shift created a strange environment inside the locker room, a mix of excitement and tension that no one was fully prepared for. Players who had once enjoyed relative privacy now found themselves answering questions that had nothing to do with their own roles or development. Coaches felt torn between building a team identity and managing the demands of a fan base that expected instant perfection. And amid all of this, friendships were tested, communication broke down, and the emotional stamina of the group slowly eroded. Clark's suspension magnified everything. It forced walls down. It exposed rifts that had been quietly forming all season. Players began questioning decisions. Coaches felt their control slipping. The atmosphere became a cycle of stress, disappointment, and unspoken frustrations. Cunningham's fiery exit and Hull's quiet departure acted like mirrors, reflecting two very different emotional responses to the same unstable environment. Their reasons were personal, yet they pointed to a shared truth. The Fever were not just dealing with a controversial suspension. They were dealing with a team culture strained by pressure, expectations, and the impossible demand to perform flawlessly under the national spotlight. Fans began to sense it. Analysts started connecting dots. And as the story spread, it became clear the Fever were standing at a crossroads. Either they would regroup and rebuild from this emotional fallout or sink deeper into a season defined more by drama than by basketball. The moment the news hit that Sophie and Lexie were leaving, the internet went wild. Fans who had spent months celebrating the team's growth were suddenly divided. Some blamed the organization, saying the pressure around Caitlin Clark had become too much. Others blamed the players, questioning their loyalty. And many blamed the league itself, arguing that Clark's suspension was the tipping point that pushed everything into chaos. Media outlets took the story and ran with it. Headlines framed it as a disaster, a betrayal, or a sign of deeper trouble. Talk shows debated whether the Fever were collapsing or simply reshaping their roster. Commentators had theories, fans had anger, and the story spread through social platforms like wildfire. For Clark, the spotlight became even hotter. Some supporters argued the team was failing her. Others accused her of unintentionally overshadowing her teammates. Even though none of this was her fault, the emotional burden fell on her shoulders. She was suspended, criticized, defended, and dragged into every possible narrative, even while she sat on the sidelines. Inside the team's headquarters, the noise was impossible to ignore. Staff members felt lost in the noise. Coaches felt overwhelmed. Players who tried to stay silent found themselves pulled into discussions they never wanted to be part of. The Fever's attempt to keep things professional did little to calm the storm. The fans were hungry for explanations. They wanted honesty. They wanted someone to take responsibility. But no one stepped forward with a clear answer, and that made the speculation grow even louder. The public meltdown was not just about 2 departures or 1 suspension. It was the culmination of months of pressure exploding at the worst possible moment. And as the chaos grew, the Fever realized this was no longer a private team issue. It had become a national basketball crisis. With Sophie and Lexie gone, all eyes naturally shifted back to Caitlin Clark. Fair or not, every storyline seemed to orbit around her. The pressure that was already massive now multiplied. Her suspension became the symbol of everything people thought was wrong with the current situation, and her return would determine whether the Fever could salvage the emotional wreckage the team was facing. Clark is resilient, but even the strongest players feel the weight of expectations when the spotlight never moves. She knew her presence brought attention, but she never asked to be the center of every narrative. She wanted to grow, learn, and contribute. Yet her development was happening under conditions unlike anything a rookie had experienced before. 2 teammates walking away during her suspension added emotional complexity to her already stressful situation. She felt responsibility, even though none of this was on her shoulders. She felt pressure to perform at a level that would justify the attention. And she felt the sting of knowing the team was fracturing during a moment when unity mattered most. The question now became simple. Could she rise above the chaos? Could she lead a team that seemed emotionally drained? Could she stay focused while carrying more weight than any first-year player ever should? Clark's future depends not just on her skill, but on the environment the Fever builds around her. If the organization wants her to thrive, they must restore stability, manage the spotlight more responsibly, and rebuild trust within the roster. This moment might become the defining chapter of her early career, a chapter that shows whether she can overcome pressure or be crushed by it. In sports, chaos can become a catalyst. And for the Fever, this painful moment might be the turning point the team desperately needed. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull's leaving, combined with Caitlin Clark's suspension, forced everyone to confront the truth. The team lacked balance. Emotions were running unchecked. Expectations were spiraling out of control. And the internal structure simply could not withstand the pressure of sudden national attention. Now the Fever stand on the edge of transformation. With 2 players gone, the organization has room to rethink roles, rebuild chemistry, and redefine leadership. coaches have the opportunity to establish clearer communication and create a culture that supports both seasoned players and rising stars. And Clark, once the center of every debate, can begin to grow in an environment that does not rely on her to carry the team emotionally. This is the moment when the Fever can choose resilience over collapse. They can learn from the mistakes, address the emotional fractures, and shape a stronger identity moving forward. If they treat this crisis as a lesson rather than a disaster, they have the chance to emerge with a renewed sense of direction. The departures of Sophie and Lexie were painful, but they also spoke truth. They exposed what needed to change. And sometimes, the most difficult moments create the clearest paths forward. As the Fever prepare for the next chapter, the question is not whether they fell apart. The real question is whether they can rebuild into something better, stronger, and emotionally united. And for fans watching this dramatic saga unfold, one thing is certain. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new one.
Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into Hollywood's hidden history.